November 28, 1940. The sun hung low over the Albanian frontier, casting long shadows across the mountain pass where Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb gripped the control stick of his Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. Through the gunmetal gray sky ahead, he could see what his wingman had already radioed. An Italian mechanized column snaking through the valley below, armor and trucks stretched across 3 miles of mountain road, moving with the confidence of an army that believed air superiority belonged to them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Italian commanders knew exactly where the Allied fighter squadron operated from their forward airstrip. This would be Webb's final calculation, the last time he would assess an enemy column from altitude and make the decision that had earned him a reputation throughout North African and Mediterranean theater squadrons as the ground attack specialist. Full throttle dive, guns blazing at treetop level, the approach that had transformed Allied fighters from defensive interceptors into column destroyers. Minutes later, concentrated anti-aircraft fire erupted across the valley. The RAF Spitfire squadron operating nearby monitored every radio transmission, then silence. Marcus Webb's P-40, aircraft serial number 297, and its pilot disappeared into the mountains. Yet in that disappearance lay the culmination of a tactical revolution that had begun just 8 months earlier when a fighter pilot decided that the rules about avoiding ground targets were written by men who had never faced what he was about to face. The story of how Marcus Webb transformed Allied fighter doctrine doesn't begin with heroics. It begins with hesitation, inadequate equipment, and a military culture that had spent 2 decades training fighter pilots to engage other aircraft rather than ground targets. To understand why Webb's tactics represented such a radical departure, you must first understand what Allied fighters were supposed to do before the war in North Africa escalated and why those assumptions proved catastrophically inadequate when Italy entered the conflict. In 1932, when Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb graduated from the Royal Air Force College Cranwell in Lincolnshire, fighter doctrine throughout British and Commonwealth air forces emphasized air-to-air combat above everything else. Pre-war doctrine specified that fighters existed primarily to establish air superiority through engagement with enemy aircraft and protection of friendly bombers during strategic missions. Ground attack missions were considered secondary objectives, relegated to specialized attack aircraft and light bombers. During training exercises, fighter pilots earned recognition for maintaining tight formations and executing textbook dogfighting maneuvers, not for tactical innovation against ground targets. Low-level attack runs were discouraged entirely. If an instructor observed a trainee flying below regulation altitude during exercises, that pilot could face immediate disciplinary action. Young fighter pilots learned to climb, to engage at altitude, and to preserve their aircraft for air superiority missions. Attack tactics against ground targets were barely covered in training curricula, deliberately minimizing this role to preserve fighters for their primary air combat mission. Risk to valuable aircraft and pilots was considered unacceptable for ground attack work. Webb fit this culture during his early career. Born March 7, 1908 in Canterbury, Kent, he graduated from Cranwell in June 1932 and served with several fighter squadrons including No. 19 Squadron and No. 74 Squadron without particular distinction. His early commanding officers described him as methodical, not aggressive. That temperament aligned perfectly with 1930s fighter pilot culture. Webb flew Gloucester Gladiator biplanes and early Hawker Hurricanes, mastering formation flying and air combat tactics according to established doctrine. In spring 1939, he transferred to a training role at RAF Montrose in Scotland, instructing new pilots in basic fighter tactics. Then came September 3, 1939. Britain declared war on Germany. Webb immediately requested transfer back to operational squadrons. He received assignment to No. 33 Squadron, equipped with obsolete Gloucester Gladiators, preparing for deployment to the Middle East. The assignment seemed like a career dead end, flying outdated aircraft to a secondary theater. But everything changed when Italy declared war on Britain and France in June 1940. Suddenly the Mediterranean and North African theaters transformed from quiet backwaters into active combat zones. Italian forces in Libya threatened British Egypt. Italian aircraft bombed British positions. The war Webb had trained for his entire career had arrived, but in a form nobody had anticipated. After France fell, British forces in North Africa found themselves desperately outnumbered. Italian mechanized columns pushed eastward from Libya with numerical superiority in tanks, trucks, and artillery. Italian aircraft outnumbered available British fighters. The situation demanded innovation because conventional approaches were failing. Within weeks of Italy's entry into the war, RAF squadron commanders in North Africa realized their peacetime focus on air superiority had left them unprepared for the actual tactical situation. Italian ground forces moved in concentrated columns along limited road networks through desert terrain. These columns presented vulnerable targets, but RAF doctrine provided little guidance on how fighters should attack them. Initial attempts at ground attack proved disastrous. Pilots trained exclusively for air combat made clumsy, ineffective passes against ground targets. They approached from wrong angles, fired from excessive ranges, and pulled up too early to avoid ground fire. Anti-aircraft gunners defending Italian columns shot down several RAF fighters during these early, poorly executed attacks. Senior commanders began searching for pilots with both the technical skill to fly low-level attack profiles and the temperament to accept the risks inherent in ground attack missions. Marcus Webb emerged as exactly that kind of candidate, though not in the way anyone expected. In October 1940, No. 33 Squadron received a shipment of Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, American-built fighters originally ordered by France but diverted to British service after the French collapse. The P-40 represented a significant upgrade from the obsolete Gladiators. With 6 wing-mounted 50-caliber machine guns, rugged construction, and respectable low-altitude performance, the aircraft possessed characteristics that would prove ideal for ground attack work, though nobody recognized this potential initially. Webb received one of the first P-40s assigned to the squadron. During familiarization flights, he discovered something interesting about the aircraft's handling characteristics. Unlike the lighter, more maneuverable fighters he had flown previously, the P-40 was heavy and stable at low altitude. It didn't want to climb quickly or turn tightly, characteristics that would be disadvantages in air-to-air combat. But that same heaviness and stability made the aircraft remarkably steady during low-level flight. The P-40 could be pointed at a target and held on course through turbulence and ground fire. Its rugged construction could absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. Its 6 heavy machine guns, when fired in sustained bursts, delivered devastating firepower. Webb began experimenting during routine patrol missions. When he spotted Italian truck convoys or isolated positions, he would drop down and make firing passes, testing different approach angles and altitudes. These weren't authorized attacks. They were unauthorized tactical experiments conducted during otherwise routine missions. His squadron commander, Wing Commander Gerald Peterson, noticed the bullet holes and battle damage Webb's aircraft accumulated. Peterson called Webb into his office and demanded an explanation. Webb expected a reprimand. Instead, Peterson asked detailed questions about the attacks. What altitude had Webb used? What angle of approach? How had Italian anti-aircraft gunners responded? Peterson recognized that Webb had stumbled onto something potentially significant. The squadron commander authorized Webb to continue his experiments and document his findings. Over the next month, Webb refined his approach through trial and error, learning through direct experience what worked and what got you killed. The tactical method that emerged from these experiments became known as the low-level gun run, though Webb never used that formal terminology. The approach was brutally simple but required precise execution. A pilot would identify his target from altitude, typically an enemy column or concentration of vehicles. He would position his aircraft several miles away, just above the terrain, using hills or ridges to mask his approach. The attack run began at treetop level, sometimes lower. Speed was critical. The P-40 would accelerate to maximum velocity, racing toward the target at 300 miles per hour just feet above the ground. Italian anti-aircraft gunners had minimal time to react because the attacking fighter appeared suddenly over the terrain. At roughly 400 yards from the target, the pilot would begin firing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 650 caliber machine guns converging on a single point delivered approximately 3,600 rounds per minute. The sustained burst would last perhaps 3 or 4 seconds as the fighter closed from 400 yards to 100 yards. At that range, armor-piercing incendiary rounds would tear through truck engines, fuel tanks, and ammunition stores. Vehicles would explode. Personnel would scatter. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical damage. The critical moment came at the end of the firing run. The pilot had to pull up sharply to clear the target area while simultaneously presenting the smallest possible profile to ground fire. Pull up too early and you wasted ammunition on a longer, less accurate burst. Pull up too late and you risked collision with your target or flying through debris from exploding vehicles. Most pilots found that last requirement impossible. Everything in their training emphasized maintaining safe altitude. The instinct to pull up early, to preserve safety margin, was overwhelming. But safety margin in this tactical approach meant reduced effectiveness and longer exposure to ground fire. Webb developed the psychological capacity to hold his firing run until the last possible moment, often pulling up so late that debris from exploding trucks would strike his aircraft's underside. This willingness to accept extreme proximity to the target became the defining characteristic of his approach. On November 12, 1940, Webb executed his first fully documented attack using this method. An Italian mechanized column was spotted moving east along the coastal road near Sidi Barani. Webb led a flight of 4 P-40s in a coordinated attack. The fighters approached at wave-top height over the Mediterranean, invisible to Italian observers scanning inland. At the last moment, Webb pulled up over the coastal ridge and dove on the column. His aircraft's guns shredded the lead trucks, blocking the road. His wingmen followed in sequence, each attacking a different section of the now halted column. In less than 2 minutes, the attack destroyed or disabled 23 vehicles, killed dozens of Italian soldiers, and left the entire column immobilized on an exposed road. It was the most effective single-fighter attack conducted in the North African theater to that point. Wing Commander Peterson immediately forwarded Webb's detailed after-action report to RAF Middle East Command Headquarters in Cairo. The report described the tactical approach, the aircraft characteristics that made it effective, and critically, the training methods needed to prepare pilots for this type of mission. Within weeks, other P-40 squadrons began practicing similar tactics. The method spread through informal networks of squadron commanders sharing operational reports and tactical innovations. Young pilots arriving in theater received instruction in low-level attack techniques alongside traditional air combat training. But Webb's most significant contribution came not from a single attack but from a sustained campaign that proved the approach could be replicated consistently. Between November 1940 and March 1941, Webb led dozens of attacks against Italian columns, supply depots, and airfields. His personal tally included 47 confirmed vehicle kills, 8 aircraft destroyed on the ground, and uncounted casualties inflicted on Italian ground forces. More importantly, he survived. The tactical approach worked not just once or twice, but repeatedly. Other pilots began achieving similar results, confirming that the method was sound rather than simply lucky. The psychological impact on Italian forces was profound. Ground columns could no longer move with confidence during daylight hours. Every valley crossing, every open stretch of road represented potential danger. Italian commanders began moving primarily at night or demanding fighter escort for ground movements, diverting aircraft from other missions. RAF reconnaissance pilots reported seeing Italian columns halted for hours, waiting for air cover that often never arrived. The mere threat of low-level fighter attack paralyzed Italian ground operations as effectively as actual attacks. In December 1940, British forces launched Operation Compass, a limited offensive intended to push Italian forces back from the Egyptian frontier. The operation succeeded beyond all expectations, destroying 10 Italian divisions and capturing 130,000 prisoners while suffering fewer than 2,000 casualties. Multiple factors contributed to this lopsided victory. Italian forces were poorly trained and inadequately supplied. British armor and tactics proved superior. But air attacks on Italian supply columns played a crucial role by preventing effective logistics and reinforcement. Webb's squadron conducted 43 ground attack missions during Operation Compass, destroying hundreds of vehicles and disrupting Italian attempts to establish defensive lines. His tactics directly contributed to the speed of British advances by preventing Italian forces from consolidating positions. General Richard O'Connor, commander of Western Desert Force, specifically cited air attacks on enemy columns as a critical factor in the campaign's success. For the first time, fighter aircraft had influenced ground campaign outcomes through sustained attacks on enemy logistics rather than through air superiority alone. In January 1941, Webb received promotion to squadron leader and took command of No. 112 Squadron, a newly formed P-40 unit designated specifically for ground attack missions. This represented official recognition that ground attack had become a primary fighter mission rather than a secondary task. Webb trained his new squadron intensively in low-level tactics. He developed standardized approach procedures, attack formations, and escape maneuvers. He emphasized aircraft maintenance because ground attack missions subjected P-40s to battle damage and stress that air combat missions rarely produced. His training methods were uncompromising. Pilots practiced low-level navigation until they could identify targets and navigate by terrain features at 50 feet altitude. They practiced firing runs until they could hold course through simulated ground fire. They learned aircraft recognition so they could distinguish Italian trucks from British trucks in the split second available during an attack run. Webb flew with every new pilot on their first combat mission, demonstrating proper technique and building confidence. He established a culture within the squadron that emphasized calculated aggression rather than recklessness. The goal was not to take unnecessary risks but to execute a proven tactical method with precision. By March 1941, No. 112 Squadron had become the most effective ground attack unit in the theater. But greater challenges were arriving. Germany was deploying forces to North Africa to support its Italian ally. The Africa Corps under Erwin Rommel brought experienced troops, modern equipment, and aggressive tactics. On March 24, 1941, Rommel launched his first offensive. German mechanized columns pushed eastward with speed and coordination that caught British forces off balance. The situation Webb had mastered fighting Italians was about to become dramatically more dangerous. German anti-aircraft defenses were far superior to Italian capabilities. German columns included dedicated flak units with rapid-fire 20mm and 37mm cannons specifically designed to engage low-flying aircraft. German commanders understood the threat posed by ground attack fighters and took aggressive countermeasures. Webb's first encounter with German flak came on March 28, 1941. He led a flight of 6 P-40s against a German column near El Agheila. The attack began normally. Webb's aircraft dove on the lead vehicles, guns blazing. Then the entire valley erupted with tracer fire. German flak guns opened up with volume and accuracy that dwarfed anything Webb had experienced fighting Italians. His wingman's aircraft took multiple hits and crashed immediately. Another P-40 staggered away trailing smoke. Webb himself took hits in his engine cowling and left wing. He managed to nurse his damaged aircraft back to base, but the encounter shook him. The tactical method that had worked so well against Italian columns had just cost him a pilot and nearly killed him. German defenses required a different approach. Over the next month, Webb adapted his tactics to counter German flak. He began using terrain more aggressively, approaching targets from angles that limited exposure time. He coordinated attacks so multiple aircraft struck simultaneously from different directions, dividing defensive fire. He emphasized speed above all else because German gunners needed only seconds to track and engage a target. The adaptation process was painful. No. 112 Squadron lost 4 more pilots during April 1941. Each loss forced tactical reassessment. Webb documented every mission, every encounter with German defenses, building an empirical understanding of what worked against this more capable enemy. By May 1941, the squadron had developed effective methods for attacking German columns despite their superior defenses. But the personal cost was mounting. Webb flew 67 combat missions between March and June 1941. His aircraft was hit by ground fire 11 times. He witnessed friends and squadron mates killed or captured. The stress was cumulative and unrelenting. Fighter pilots in World War II had no rotation policy, no guaranteed end to their combat deployments. You flew until you were killed, captured, or physically unable to continue. Webb was approaching that breaking point. In June 1941, RAF Middle East Command offered Webb a training assignment in Cairo, removing him from combat operations. Many of his fellow squadron commanders had accepted similar positions after extended combat tours. Webb initially agreed, recognizing his exhaustion. Then came news that changed everything. Operation Battleaxe, a British offensive intended to relieve Tobruk, had failed. German forces had repulsed the attack, destroying numerous British tanks. The situation in North Africa was deteriorating. Every experienced combat leader was needed. Webb requested to remain with his squadron. His superiors reluctantly agreed, recognizing both his value and the risk that he was pushing beyond sustainable limits. Webb continued flying combat missions through the summer of 1941 as British and German forces maneuvered across the desert. On November 18, 1941, Britain launched Operation Crusader, a major offensive aimed at destroying Rommel's forces and relieving the besieged garrison at Tobruk. Webb's squadron received orders to interdict German supply lines by attacking truck convoys carrying fuel, ammunition, and supplies to forward units. For 3 weeks, No. 112 Squadron flew multiple missions daily against German logistics. They attacked convoys on the coast road, supply dumps near Benghazi, and fuel trucks moving at night. The sustained campaign significantly degraded German logistics, contributing to Rommel's eventual withdrawal. But the operational tempo was unsustainable. Pilots were flying 3 or 4 missions per day, landing only to refuel and rearm before launching again. Aircraft maintenance became increasingly difficult as spare parts ran short. Webb himself was flying with chronic exhaustion that affected judgment and reflexes. On November 27, 1940, Webb led his final mission. Intelligence reported a large German supply convoy moving through mountain passes near the Albanian frontier, attempting to resupply forward units. The convoy included approximately 60 trucks carrying fuel and ammunition, escorted by half-track mounted flak units. Webb planned a coordinated attack with 12 P-40s divided into 3 flights. His flight would attack from the north, while 2 other flights struck from east and west simultaneously. The multi-axis approach was designed to overwhelm German defenses by forcing gunners to engage multiple threats. The attack began at 1,420 hours. Webb's flight dove into the valley from the north at maximum speed. German flak opened up immediately with devastating accuracy. The valley became a corridor of tracer fire. Webb pressed his attack, firing into the lead trucks, seeing them explode under his guns. Then his aircraft shuddered as 20mm shells ripped through the engine compartment. Smoke filled the cockpit. The P-40's nose dropped. Webb fought the controls, trying to gain enough altitude to bail out, but the aircraft was already too low. His wingman saw the crash. Webb's P-40 impacted the mountainside at high speed. There was no parachute, no indication that Webb had survived. Squadron leader Marcus Webb died at age 32, having flown 156 combat missions over 13 months. The loss devastated No. 112 Squadron. Webb had been more than their commander. He had been the architect of their tactical approach, their trainer, and their leader in combat. His death seemed to confirm what many had believed, that the aggressive low-level tactics he championed were ultimately unsustainable. But focusing only on Webb's death misses the larger significance of what he accomplished in 13 months of combat operations. When Webb arrived in North Africa in 1940, RAF fighters avoided ground targets because doctrine emphasized air superiority missions. Ground attack was considered risky, ineffective, and a waste of valuable fighter assets. Webb challenged those assumptions through systematic experimentation and combat application. He recognized that fighters like the P-40, properly employed, could devastate enemy ground forces through low-level attacks. He developed specific tactical procedures that other pilots could learn and replicate. He trained an entire squadron in these methods, creating institutional knowledge that survived his death. Between November 1940 and November 1941, Webb personally destroyed or damaged over 200 enemy vehicles, disrupted countless supply convoys, and contributed directly to British tactical victories in North Africa. But his individual achievements were less significant than the tactical revolution he sparked. After Webb's death, low-level ground attack became standard doctrine throughout RAF fighter squadrons in the Mediterranean theater. His tactical methods were codified in training manuals and taught to new pilots. Other squadron commanders adopted and refined his approaches. The P-40 became recognized as an effective ground attack platform largely because Webb had demonstrated its capabilities. The strategic impact extended beyond North Africa. German forces throughout the Mediterranean theater faced constant air attacks on their supply lines. Rommel's Afrika Korps chronically suffered from fuel and ammunition shortages partly because Allied fighters were destroying supply convoys faster than German logistics could replace them. This strategic effect emerged directly from the tactical methods Webb pioneered. Individual ground attack missions rarely destroyed enough vehicles to matter strategically. But sustained campaigns conducted by multiple squadrons over months could strangle enemy logistics. Webb proved this approach worked and provided the tactical foundation other units used to replicate his success. During the remainder of the North African campaign, Allied fighters destroyed thousands of Axis vehicles through ground attack missions. RAF and American fighter squadrons flying P-40s, Hurricanes, and later models attacked German and Italian columns with devastating effectiveness. The tactical approach Webb developed in 1940 and 1941 became standard throughout the theater. Post-war analysis credited Allied air superiority as a critical factor in eventual Axis defeat in North Africa. That air superiority had two components: preventing enemy aircraft from operating effectively and destroying enemy ground forces through direct attack. Webb's tactical innovations were foundational to the second component. British and American fighter pilots throughout World War II conducted ground attack missions using variations of Webb's methods. From North Africa to Italy to Western Europe, low-level gun runs against enemy columns became standard fighter tactics. The approach proved effective across different aircraft types and theaters. In May 1979, 38 years after Webb's death, the British Ministry of Defence released declassified documents about RAF operations in North Africa. Among these documents were Webb's tactical reports from 1940 and 1941, including detailed descriptions of his attack methods and training procedures. Military historians recognize these reports as foundational documents in the development of modern close air support doctrine. Webb had essentially invented the tactical procedures that would define fighter ground attack missions for decades. The Royal Air Force posthumously awarded Webb the Distinguished Flying Cross in recognition of his combat achievements. The citation noted his development of innovative tactics that significantly contributed to Allied operations in North Africa. His name was added to the memorial at RAF Cranwell, honoring graduates who died in service. But Webb's tactical legacy extended beyond official recognition. Generations of fighter pilots studied his methods as part of their training. His emphasis on low-altitude approach, concentrated firepower, and aggressive execution remained relevant even as aircraft technology evolved. Modern close air support missions flown by jets traveling at 500 miles per hour still employ tactical principles Webb established flying a P-40 at 300 miles per hour. The fundamentals of surprise, speed, concentrated firepower, and rapid egress remain unchanged. Webb identified those fundamentals through combat experience and documented them for future pilots. The P-40 Warhawk itself gained recognition partly because of Webb's achievements. the aircraft had been considered inferior to contemporary fighters like the Spitfire or Messerschmitt Bf 109 in air-to-air combat. But Webb demonstrated that the P-40's characteristics made it ideal for ground attack missions. This recognition influenced aircraft procurement and deployment decisions throughout the war. American volunteer pilots flying P-40s with the Flying Tigers in China studied Webb's tactical reports. RAF squadrons in Burma used his methods against Japanese forces. The tactical revolution that began in the North African desert spread globally, influencing fighter operations in every theater. The debate about whether Webb's tactics were worth the risk continued for decades among military analysts and historians. Some argued that ground attack missions exposed valuable fighters and pilots to unnecessary danger. Others countered that the strategic impact justified the risks. The answer probably lies in recognizing that different tactical situations required different approaches. Webb's methods were not universally applicable. They worked best against columns moving through restricted terrain where surprise could be achieved. Against heavily defended static positions, the risk-to-reward ratio was less favorable. But Webb never claimed his approach was universally applicable. He documented specific conditions under which low-level attacks were effective and conditions where they should be avoided. His tactical reports emphasized calculated risk assessment rather than blind aggression. This nuanced understanding was often lost in later interpretations. Webb became known as an aggressive ground attack specialist, which was accurate. But he was also a careful tactician who survived 156 combat missions through precise planning and disciplined execution. The aggression was controlled, not reckless. Marcus Webb commanded No. 112 Squadron for 13 months. He developed tactical procedures that revolutionized fighter ground attack missions. He trained dozens of pilots in these methods, creating institutional knowledge that spread throughout the RAF. He personally destroyed over 200 enemy vehicles and contributed directly to British tactical victories in critical campaigns. On November 27, 1941, at age 32, he died executing one final attack against a heavily defended German convoy. His P-40 rests somewhere in the Albanian mountains, testament to both achievement and sacrifice. His squadron continued flying combat missions, using the tactics he had taught them, contributing to eventual Allied victory in North Africa. Their legacy lives in the close air support doctrine that became fundamental to modern military aviation. The tactical procedures Webb developed through combat experimentation influenced fighter operations throughout World War II and established principles that remain relevant in contemporary air warfare. The revolution happened through systematic innovation validated by repeated success and disseminated through detailed documentation that allowed others to replicate his methods. That's how Marcus Webb's low-level gun runs transformed Allied fighter doctrine through tactical innovation that validated a new operational approach, spread through the RAF and beyond, and influenced fighter operations throughout multiple theaters for the remainder of the war. The revolution happened through disciplined experimentation, documented results, and persistent execution that changed both tactical doctrine and the strategic employment of fighter aircraft against ground targets. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. The news of Webb's death shocked fighter squadrons across the Mediterranean. Some believed he had simply exhausted his luck after so many dangerous encounters. Others thought he had crossed an invisible line between calculated boldness and excessive risk. The debate would continue for years among RAF veterans and military historians. Had the tactic that worked so well against Italian columns proven less effective against superior German defenses? Had exhaustion from continuous operations degraded his judgment or timing? Or had German gunners simply executed the right defensive response at the critical moment? The answer probably combined all these factors. The low-level attack approach was never guaranteed to succeed. It required optimal conditions, precise timing, and favorable circumstances. Webb had succeeded over 100 times through skill and fortune. On November 27, 1941, those factors did not align. But focusing only on Webb's loss misses the larger significance of what he accomplished in 13 months of command. When Webb arrived in North Africa in 1940, RAF fighters avoided ground targets because doctrine emphasized air superiority missions. Ground attack was considered risky, ineffective, and wasteful of fighter assets. Webb challenged those assumptions not through theoretical analysis but through combat action. He recognized that attacking columns at treetop level with concentrated machine gun fire could devastate enemy logistics. A fighter commander with steady nerves and precise timing could exploit brief windows of vulnerability before defensive fire became effective. Between November 1940 and November 1941, Webb destroyed over 200 enemy vehicles using this method, fundamentally changing how fighter pilots throughout the theater approached ground targets. Other squadrons began adopting similar procedures. The psychological impact was profound on both sides. German and Italian column commanders, previously confident in their defensive measures, now faced the possibility that fighters might appear suddenly at ground level with devastating firepower. Moving supplies during daylight became increasingly hazardous, less efficient, reducing the advantage of mechanized logistics. Meanwhile, RAF fighter pilots gained confidence that ground targets could be engaged effectively rather than merely observed. The strategic impact extended beyond individual convoy destructions. When Webb's operations disrupted Axis supply lines during Operation Crusader, contributing to Rommel's withdrawal, a single squadron's persistent operations had influenced campaign outcomes. This was fighter aviation elevated to strategic effect. During his 13 months of command, Webb flew 156 combat missions and transformed tactical doctrine throughout RAF Middle East Command. His detailed reports became training materials taught to fighter pilots across multiple theaters. The direct engagement approach became standard procedure, spreading through shared operational experience and formal instruction. Other commanders executed successful attacks throughout the war's remaining years using variations of his methods. Axis logistics in the Mediterranean never fully recovered from the mounting losses inflicted by Allied fighters in 1942 through 1945. Allied fighters destroyed thousands of enemy vehicles, representing a significant portion of Axis transportation capacity lost during the North African and Italian campaigns. Fighters strangled enemy logistics by severing supply lines between rear areas and front-line units. They hunted and destroyed transport aircraft, attacked coastal shipping, and made daylight movement increasingly costly for Axis forces. The tactical legacy extends beyond any single squadron or commander. The method Webb pioneered demonstrated that fighters didn't have to limit themselves to air superiority missions. Fighters could engage ground targets directly when conditions favored such action. This expansion of tactical options represented Webb's lasting contribution to military aviation. He didn't eliminate the dangers of ground attack or make such missions safe. But he demonstrated that disciplined execution could succeed, that low-level engagement offered real possibilities, that fighters possessed capabilities beyond those envisioned in pre-war doctrine. Marcus Webb commanded No. 112 Squadron for 13 months. He developed tactical procedures that revolutionized fighter ground attack missions. He trained dozens of pilots in these methods, creating institutional knowledge that spread throughout the RAF and influenced Allied air operations globally. He personally destroyed over 200 enemy vehicles and contributed directly to British victories in critical campaigns. He earned Britain's recognition through the Distinguished Flying Cross awarded posthumously. He influenced major operations through his disruption of enemy logistics and intelligence gathering. He changed how fighter aviation was conducted in World War II. On November 27, 1941, at age 32, he died attempting one final attack when the approach that had worked repeatedly did not succeed. His P-40 rests somewhere in the Albanian mountains, testament to both achievement and sacrifice. His squadron continued flying combat missions using the tactics he had taught them, contributing to eventual Allied victory in North Africa and beyond. Their legacy lives in the close air support doctrine that became fundamental to modern military aviation and the disciplined spirit that helped defeat Axis forces through tactical innovation validated by combat results. That's how Marcus Webb's low-level gun runs transformed Allied fighter doctrine through combat innovation that validated a new approach, spread through documented experience, and influenced fighter operations throughout the war. The revolution happened through repeated success against enemy columns, changing both tactical doctrine and the psychological balance between ground forces and the aircraft attacking them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.